Hey everybody, Danessa Gates here. Thanks for joining today's leadership micro session, The Invisible Line You Cross Before Burnout. So let's go ahead and jump in. Most people think burnout happens when things get hard or tough, when the pressure increases, when workload piles up, when things simply kind of become too much. But that's not actually when it happens. You don't burn out when things get hard. You burn out after crossing a line you didn't even know was there. And that's why burnout is so difficult to catch, especially for high performers, because that moment that actually matters, it doesn't look like a problem. So it's hard to identify, right? You're still functioning, you're still responding, you're still getting results, you're still showing up. Nothing is obviously wrong. So there's nothing to correct. But internally, something has shifted. So I call that the behavioral line. And you may have heard the term behavioral geofencing before. And if you're not familiar, usually that refers to how crossing a boundary triggers a predictable behavior. For instance, entering a zone or crossing a threshold that triggers a response. So, what I'm pointing to is an internal version of that, where your system crosses a line under pressure and your behavior starts to shift automatically or unconsciously. It's almost like a form of behavioral geofencing, but not external, internal. A point where your system shifts, where your behavior starts to change, where you move from regulation into override. And it's not because something is wrong, but because pressure is present. And then your system adapts. So oftentimes, what happens here is people will ask me, well, what do you mean by align? Like, what actually changes? Well, if it's easy to miss, especially for high performers, obviously it's not a dramatic line that we're crossing. It's very subtle. So it might look like reacting a little faster than usual, or tightening up in your body, or contracting when something small goes wrong, or overextending or over explaining something that doesn't need explaining, or perhaps this hyper awareness of scanning for what you might have missed. So they don't sound extreme, but it's different from your baseline. That's the line people cross. So, just to give you a few examples of what that might look like, right? For instance, you get an email that feels slightly off. Normally, you just read it and respond. But now you find yourself rereading it, analyzing the tone, start anticipating problems, start managing perception, not because there are problems, but because internally your system shifted. So you miss another example is you miss a small detail, right? Normally you just correct it and move on, but now you spike. You might feel that tightening and contraction within your body, and then a sense that it matters more than it should. Something simple becomes almost very complicated in your system. There's another example is there's tension in a conversation that you have. Normally, you just stay present and handle the conversation. But now you start adjusting, managing perception, thinking ahead instead of staying in it. So that might look like listening to reply rather than actively listening to what the person across from you is saying. Same situations, but different internal response. So the reframe here is burnout doesn't start with pressure. It starts with how your system responds to pressure. That line is the moment your system moves from being grounded to being reactive, from being present to being anticipatory, or from being clear to being compressed, losing clarity, losing focus. And most people miss it because externally, everything looks the same. You're still responding, you're still getting results, but internally that shift has happened. And so this is where people might ask me, well, if it's that subtle, Danessa, how would I even notice it? Well, you don't notice it through behavior first. You notice it through your body. Okay, so that threshold will typically look like tension in your jaw, some sort of heaviness or tension in your chest. You'll find your breath speeding up, or you'll have a sense of urgency within that wasn't there before, or a feeling of needing to get it right, or say the right thing, or look correct. And those things, they're not overwhelming. They're small shifts. And the reason high performers miss it is because they're trained to track external data, not internal state. So the moment their system changes, they keep going. They push past it. They've normalized the behavior. And that's where the burnout patterns begin. So another question that often comes up here for me is, if this is happening all the time, how do I know when and what actually matters? Well, again, not every shift is a problem, but when you start seeing the same pattern, so there's some pattern recognition here, when you start seeing that pattern repeat, like the same urgency feeling, or the same tightness in the jaw, or the same behavioral changes in similar moments, those aren't random. That's a pattern that your system has learned, and that pattern is what becomes predictable over time. So then people might ask me, well, am I supposed to avoid crossing the line? And the answer is no. That's not the goal. You're going to cross the line, right? Pressure is simply a part of performance. So it's not about avoiding the line. It's about noticing when your system shifts inside it. So the shift this week might be, instead of asking, well, what's happening around me? Ask, what just changed in me? Not in a dramatic way, in a noticing and awareness way, right? No judgment. You're just aware of what's happening. Because the faster that you recognize that shift, the faster you can reset, recover, and come back. So a micro tool could be this week could be as simple as asking yourself, well, did something just tighten? Did my urgency just spike? Did I start managing perception instead of just responding? That awareness alone starts to bring you back to your baseline, because the line itself isn't the problem. It's staying past it without awareness. That's what creates the internal cost. So burnout isn't about how much pressure you're under. It's about how long your system stays in a shifted state under that pressure. So I'll say that again. It's not about how much pressure you're under. It's about how long your system stays in a shifted state under that pressure. So again, the goal is not to remove pressure. It's to become someone who can notice the shift, recognize the line, and then return to baseline before it compounds. So most people don't miss this because they're unaware. They miss it because they've learned to normalize this. So, if this resonates, where do you notice that shift happening most for you right now? Hey, Richie.
Hey, Danessa.
Hey,
Good
lady.
afternoon. Good morning.
Hello. Yes, I'm. Thanks for coming on today. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know you kind of jumped in, so no pressure. But talking about pressure, no pressure. But just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
I feel like I come across these examples all the time. So an email comes through and rather than being an autopilot, like sometimes you're just an autopilot, but you grab things or you sense things or even tones in email sometimes. And to avoid even conflict or just whatever, I'll just go on autopilot and reply, but then it kind of bothers me, like it marinates later, and then I'm like, oh,
Yes, that.
I should have did something different.
hmm Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, no, that is makes total sense, right? And honestly, those are the types of patterns that we're talking about here because and I can totally resonate with that, right? I did a ton of that before this work. And so anytime anybody would say anything, right, I would ruminate on, well, I could have said it differently, or I should have done it this way, and I'm
Hmm.
the one carrying the emotional load and the emotional cost when that person
Hmm.
has no idea, right?
Right, they've moved on.
Exactly, exactly. And we're the ones sitting with it and paying the cost.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I definitely that's good to know, right? It's good to have some resonance in this because sometimes we feel like we're alone, like am I the only person doing this? But certainly not, right?
Right. Hmm.
So, yeah, and next week too, I'm going to actually take this a little further because once you start noticing that line, the next question becomes, well, what actually happens when you cross it in real time? So we're going to get a
Hmm.
little bit more into that and not just internally, but in how you show up, how you project, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
there's a really specific, I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, I'm agreeing. I.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
because there's just a specific moment where your presence starts to shift. Obviously, you've experienced it, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes your authority will drop slightly because of the things you're carrying or thinking about or managing in your head, even if
Right.
you're still saying all the right things, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and most people just don't realize it's happening.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yes, totally. So that's actually all I had today. Is there anything else you wanted to add or any questions?
No,
Okay,
not
cool.
today. But I'm
Cool.
interested in into diving into the next section, so I'll make a point
Excellent.
to block my calendar out.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to put you on the invite as well, okay?
Okay, awesome.
I'll send you a personal invite for it.
Okay, thank you, Danessa.
You betcha, lady. You have a great day.
All right, you too.
See you
Take
around.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.